Hi, everybody. Welcome to our DAT Weekly Market Update. This is our update for September the 23rd, episode 355. I'm Dean Croak, Market Analyst, of course, here with Jeremy Reymer from Project 61. Jeremy, great to have you with us.
Great to be here, Dean. I'm glad to be on the show.
Yeah, we caught up last in Indianapolis, I think, at the KSM event, if my memory serves me correctly.
Yeah. Great place for transportation,
Yeah.
right in the heart of the Midwest.
Yeah. And you're in Ohio today?
I am in Ohio today. Yeah, the Ohio Trucking Association. Been a member for maybe close to 20 years.
Right.
So their annual conference, I get to kind of spread the message about Project 61 here.
Right. So for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about what you do at Project 61.
Sure. Well, about just over a year ago, I formed a nonprofit called Project 61, and the relevance to the number 61 is this is the average life expectancy of a commercial truck driver.
Right.
And if you just let that sink in for a minute, that sober, realization was something that, as I got older, I just realized I got to do something about this. I want to be a part of the solution to this. This is bigger than me, obviously, and it's not something I can do alone. But sort of building and coalescing a movement around addressing driver health and wellness is something that I've become increasingly passionate about.
Yeah. It's a pretty big subject, one that's pretty close to my heart. So I did a lot of work around sleep science. It's one of the reasons that I ended up in this country was because I lost a couple of drivers on my watch. So we can talk about that a little bit later once I get through the freight market update. So we'll bring Jeremy back a little bit later. Let me dive into some of the data behind last week's freight market. So we'll bring back Jeremy later. So some of the things we're watching last week, spot rates down across the board, except flatbed. Flatbed's continuing a pretty strong second half, and it's tracking along with 2017. It has been since the start of August. And of course, that was a very strong industrial economy. But of course, there's two very different economies between 2017 and now. That may just be a complete coincidence in terms of rate directionality. But we'll have a look at that a little bit later in the show. Flatbed is holding an 11 cents margin over last year. In Texas, where Governor Abbott has ramping up English language proficiency on truck drivers in a bid to keep unsafe operators off the road, outbound rates fell 5 cents. Inbound rates were flat in Texas. Same in Florida. Inbound rates fell 6 cents, despite most carriers in California hauling produce declining to go there for fear of being harassed. Outbound rates were down 2 cents. So despite all of the noise around rates expected to increase as a result of targeting drivers over English language, they're in fact going the opposite direction. Rates are falling. Contract rates, replacement rates entering routing guides based on recent RFPs, dry van, reefer and flatbed are all negative this period. Shippers still have pricing power. Cash shipments, the index came out last week. August fell 1.5% month over month, down a whopping 9.3% year over year. That's the steepest decline in the shipments index since October of 2023. The residential construction, US single-family permits came out last week. They were down 11.5% year over year. Single-family housing starts plunged to a 2.5-year low in August, suggesting there's a real glut of unsold new houses in the market. Housing starts, the raw number, down 7% from July, 11.7% from August last year. It's a real worry for flatbed carriers. Of course, the only good news really was that interest rates fell 0.25%, and they signaled there could be 2 more 0.25% cuts before the end of the year. The hopes are that that can only provide a moderate improvement in market activity for flatbed carriers. Don't forget the market update will be out this evening. Go to dat.com/market update. Having a look at some of our load post activities. Load posts saw another 6% increase in volume. Load posts are sitting about 40% higher than last year. In Houston, the top van market last week, volumes are up about 5%. Spot rates held flat. Compared to outbound state level rates, which dropped about 3 cents. Our top 5 markets for load posts were Houston, Los Angeles, New Jersey, Elizabeth Market, Dallas, and Atlanta. In Houston, volumes were up slightly, rates flat. On our top lane between Houston and Dallas, rates were up a penny last week and up about 6% compared to the same time last year. In the reefer market, volumes were down across the board, and they're up about up slightly on last year. Despite that, volumes were fairly consistent with the pre-pandemic average for week 38, going back 6 or 7 years. The top volume market for load posts last week was Elizabeth, New Jersey, but volumes were down about 11% last week. Capacity was extremely loose for reefer carriers on the East Coast. Reefer rates dropped about 15 cents week over week in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Mixed results, though, on some of the Midwest lanes, like Chicago, rates were down 5 cents out of Elizabeth. Columbus loads were paying carriers 2 cents a mile higher. Alarmingly, though, loads to the West Coast to Los Angeles out of Elizabeth were down to just 80 cents a mile. Down 2 cents week over week, but identical to this time last year. And lastly, in flatbed, last week there was another surge in flatbed load post volumes, up 25% in the last month. Load posts were up 17% last week. Some strong load post activity in the Houston market. It was our number one flatbed market for load posts last week, followed by Los Angeles, Elizabeth, Dallas, and Atlanta, rounding out the top 5 for load post volumes. Houston's pretty much always our largest load post market. Volumes were up 5% last week. Spot rates were up 6 cents a mile week over week. Some of the gains there in terms of rate movement were boosted by shorter haul regional lanes, Tulsa and New Orleans. On the high volume lanes out of Houston, rates continue to fall to El Paso and Lubbock, Texas. All right, let's have a look at our year-over-year look at spot rates. Remember, these are excluding fuel. Dry van line haul rates dropped by just over a penny per mile last week, averaging $1.65. They're about 4 cents a mile higher than where they were last year. On our top 50 lanes, based on the volume of loads moved, they were down about 2 cents a mile last week. They were paying carriers an average of $1.99. That's sitting about 34 cents a mile higher than the 7-day rolling average. And in our 13 key Midwest bellwether states, rates were down 4 cents a mile last week. Carriers earned an average of $1.87. Having a look at our refrigerated market, for all temperature zones, the 7-day rolling average for carriers dropped 2 cents a mile to just under $2, making it's about a 2 cent per mile increase compared to this time last year. Having a look at some of the produce markets, fall produce is coming online. In the Yakima Valley in the Pacific Northwest, carriers to haul apples, pears, rhubarb, and blueberries were in high demand. Outbound loads out of the Pacific Northwest were paying carriers $2.86. Compared to the national average of $2. So some pretty good value for carriers up there in the Pacific Northwest. Nationally, though, for all produce-specific loads, the USDA reported a national average of $3.72, down 5 cents a mile last week. And in flatbed, lastly, flatbed rates rose 5 cents, rose to $2.05 last week, increased by a penny per mile to $2.05. That's about 11 cents per mile higher than last year. It's also 16 cents a mile higher than what it was in 2023. It's maintaining about a 4 cent per mile lead over 2017, which we mentioned at the start of the show was a very strong industrial economy. We're monitoring that trend very closely, although I suspect that's more of a coincidence when you look at that chart. All right, lastly, before we bring Jeremy back in, let's have a quick look at our short-term 35-day forecast using Ratecast. The Ratecast forecast is the green line, and it's bounded by the upper and lower forecasts in yellow and red. Remember, these are excluding fuel for loads over 550 miles. In dry van, Ratecast is expecting rates down a couple of pennies. This is bringing us to just before Halloween at the end of the month, so after October 24. Ratecast is expecting rates down to $1.63. If that lands at that level, that'll be about 2 cents lower than where it was last year. So that should be pretty much on the money. The low case is expecting rates down 8, high case up 5. So I think Ratecast will be right on the money there. Right before Halloween, when we start to see rates start to increase. Refrigerated market, Ratecast is expecting rates down 4 cents out to October 24 at 194. That will be 3 cents a mile lower than where they were last year. At October 24 last year, they were at $1.97. And in flatbed, Ratecast is expecting rates down just a penny out to October 24 at $2.04. If that lands at that level, they'll still be 10 cents a mile higher than where they were last year. The low case is expecting rates down 6, high case up 4. So I think Ratecast has got a pretty good track record in the last few months, and will pretty much be spot on as we head into that Halloween period. And of course, once we get past the end, next week's forecast will take us past Halloween, and we start to get into the start of the next forecast period in the lead up to Halloween, into Thanksgiving, where we start to see rates get that upward inflection. All right, let's bring Jeremy back in. Jeremy, question to start off: why is the average life expectancy of the US trucker just 61 years of age?
It's sad, but if you can imagine, all day, every day, a majority of what you do is just sit,
Yeah.
right? And top of that, you're mobile, so you're, traveling, you're not at home, you don't have the luxury of the good types of food that you could have easier access to at home, and
Right.
you're just eating mostly processed, refined foods, sugars, things like that. You're not drinking enough water for reasons that you don't want to stop and have to use the restroom. Horrible idea if health matters to you, right? And then on top of that, when you're averaging less than 5 hours of sleep a night, and then this is what you do every day over and over and over again, that is a recipe for an early exit in life. And so we need them, right? We need these drivers. I mean, it's a really important job, and it's a really difficult job, but we need to help them change their behavior and be a lot more intentional about what they eat or don't eat, when they move, whenever they can, and then of course really be disciplined and intentional about getting proper sleep.
Yeah, it's one of the things I've always struggled with here. Coming from Australia, and the hours of service uh, rules in Australia require that you get out of the truck every 5 hours. I always struggle with the idea here that you could sit in a truck for 8 hours. Having done a few million miles as an over-the-road driver, sitting in a truck for 8 hours is not healthy. It's not good. Certainly from a load restraint perspective and checking tires, you need to get out of the vehicle fairly frequently. So, good professional driving habits mandate that you should get out every couple of hours anyway and just check the vehicle. I see a lot of drivers don't do that.
Sure.
And that, from a health perspective, it's fairly deadly, I think, just to sit there for long periods of time, especially in equipment. The older school trucks are not very comfortable.
Right.
But modern trucks, Jeremy, modern trucks these days, they are somewhat armchair-like. They're fairly comfortable. And I think a lot of drivers get lulled into a false sense of security where they can sit there for long periods of time in this sedentary position and not move around, which is probably the worst thing they can be doing. But then I think they get into this. I use the term false sense of security, but you kind of get desensitized to how you are feeling. And so my specialty is human physiology. And I think what happens is you lose the ability to understand how you feel. And what happens is you sort of forget the good practices that you're taught, which is, moving, eating, sleeping properly, hydration, making better decisions. So as you go through the day, you tend to make, I won't say worse decisions, but you're not making better decisions as the day goes on, particularly when you pull up.
Yeah, and it's important to start your day off right too. When you can't, start your day off with water, with hydration, and then coffee's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Certainly better than soda, diet or regular. Just these sugary drinks. I mean, this is like just the worst. Sadly, as you probably have seen these statistics. I mean, in trucking, diabetes and pre-diabetes is more than double. The average American. That's how many drivers are suffering, and it's preventable. So much of that is preventable.
Do you think is it diet? Is the diet the biggest problem?
In my opinion, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
In my opinion, it's diet, because that's the one thing that you have control over the most, right? Like if I'm driving 11 hours every single day, I do have a break that's mandatory. I do have some control over what I do during that break if I can, but I need to move, right? I can't go and sit down in a truck stop after I've been sitting for 5 hours.
Yeah.
But I am going to eat. I mean, I'm going to eat food 3 to 5 times a day. What am I eating? That I think is the most important.
It's somewhat bizarre when you think about the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration asks you to be safe and designs these regulations around safety. Most of those folks work a 7.5 to 8 hour day. Yet the minimum day for a truck driver is certainly 11. On the outside 14. So it's all so the people that design regulations give truck drivers a work day that's almost double what they do,
Right.
and they want you to be safe at that level. So it's somewhat of a paradox in a way, because it's not. I don't think it's possible for the two to work together when you have that sort of a work day, because it doesn't leave a lot of time for all of the good decisions you need to make, such
Right.
as living a life, exercise, and sleep. Because what you're trying to cram into that 14-hour window is just not conducive to good habits.
Well, and the sleep part, I mean, you
Right,
have, condensed, you need to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep,
right,
and you have 10 hours at
right,
best to do
right,
that, and that's not
right.
happening.
Not happening.
It's not happening. About maybe close to half. Actually, I think 4.86
Right.
hours is what
Average.
I've seen. Yeah. That's horrible. Like,
If
that
you
in
if
and of
you're
itself is awful. If you eat well and you exercise and you only get that,
right,
that's
right.
really bad.
Well, those studies, we did those studies in the late 90s, where if your 10-hour break falls after sunrise, you're lucky to get 4.5 hours sleep in that 10-hour break. And if it happens at night, you might get 6 hours on that 10-hour break. But that's a lot of the problems drivers face, is a 10-hour break doesn't equal 10 hours of sleep
Right.
in any way, shape, or form. That's why drivers always like the paper logs, because you could fit your sleep in around however you felt. But that's the biggest problem drivers have got, is the lack of sleep correlates very closely to weight gain. Like
Sure.
when you start to get less than 6 hours sleep, you start to put on the weight. Um, I've found that the sleep is probably the thing that I've found drives a lot of the unhealthy consequences, and it's less than 6 hours is a big problem. We tend not to talk enough about the sleep side of it. We talk a lot about compliance to hours of service, but
Mhm.
we don't talk about teaching drivers how to get adequate sleep in the time off period. I think that's a big miss. The problem, I was at a conference last week of carriers, and they said, this was an insurance conference, and said, what's the one thing we could do to make drivers safer? And I said, very simply, start them at the same time every day. If you start work at the same time every single day, what you lock in is sleep at the same time every
Yeah.
day, because the human brain has an inbuilt drive for anchor sleep, which is sleep at the same time every day. And if you lock in the start time, you lock in sleep, because one of the problems that you have with inconsistent start time is sleep disruption.
Yeah.
And if you disrupt sleep, you end up with disrupted sleep patterns. And it's called social jet lag, is where you have these different start times. It's why we went away from the 18-hour pattern where you had 10 on, 8 off before 2004.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
and I mean, obviously, you've got a background in sleep and the
Mm.
study of how important sleep is, and um, it's. I feel like drivers, by and large, are always concerned. I don't want to talk about sleep because now they go down the path of sleep apnea.
Mm.
I don't want to get tested,
Right.
and you're
Right.
like, it's no one's trying to. We just want to help.
Right.
You
Right.
know, and obviously there's plenty of drivers who suffer from sleep apnea, and when
Mm.
they get tested and get, especially fitted with a CPAP machine and use it,
Mm. Mm.
the 100% of the time I hear from them is, I can't believe I waited this long. Like, I sleep
Right.
amazing now.
Right.
And they
Right.
just don't understand what they're missing and how important
Yeah.
that is to
Yeah.
their health.
But Jeremy, there's even then there's still this missing component around the appetite, the weight, the nutrition.
Mhm.
Because even when I started the show, I was talking off air about my father was a trucker all his life, and he died of his second heart attack at age 65. And so he was a trucker all his life, smoked, drank 6 pack of beer every night to knock himself out to get up at 3 a.m. to go and drive a truck. So because he couldn't fall asleep at 8 o'clock at night to get up at 3 a.m. You can see the psychology at play here. And this was back in the early 2000s. Sleep science, sleep medicine around sleep apnea wasn't a well-defined practice. So they really didn't know. They didn't connect the dots with the heart attack with undiagnosed sleep apnea, which of course is very well documented now, the stress it puts on the heart
Right.
from the cessation of breath and the stress it puts on the heart. So he had undiagnosed sleep apnea all of his work life, but he would self-medicate through alcohol and cigarettes. But the problem was that the lack of diagnosis led to this real roller coaster that he was on, that no one ever really was able to break the cycle. And I see a lot of drivers doing that today, where they don't know what's going on, but they're in this brain fog that they can't break the cycle because there's no clarity. There's no clarity of thought where you can actually make better decisions. So even though you might be wearing a CPAP, no one's connecting the dots for them that says to break the cycle, because they're not. I find that a lot of the people that are the vendors aren't helping you break the cycle because they really have a self-interest in selling you hoses and masks.
Right.
What you really got to do is get the weight off, because if you get the weight off, for a lot of drivers, that can mean you can actually lose the dependency on the CPAP machine.
And you could lose a dependency on insulin or metformin for diabetes if you have, type 2.
Yeah. The weight loss is absolutely critical, which comes back to what we started the show talking about, which is appetite, nutrition, making better decisions. Jeremy, I was past some people yesterday coming up US 95 between Las Vegas and Reno, coming up here to Truckee, and I passed a flatbed carrier with not just one bicycle under his flatbed, but two underneath the flatbed trailer. And it got me thinking about exercise on the road. It's not something you see a lot of. It was a really unique experience. And but I think that's sort of the missing piece we've got here, is that was an anomaly. You just don't see a lot of drivers thinking about lifestyle because it's such a hard life. I mean, it's the hardest job I've ever done in my life, like by far. Not the steering part's easy, like that's a cinch. It's everything else you've got to do. It's spending a 34-hour break on a weekend in a truck stop. It's a long weekend in a truck stop. It's waiting for loads. Like there's so much goes on around the non-driving part that is soul destroying. Like we're not even talking about mental health here.
Yeah,
but that's a part of it that's really, I think that's what grinds drivers into the ground. That's a big part of your Project 61.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think of this in a very holistic way, right? And all of those play into the mental health too. It's such a stressful job.
Yeah,
incredible amount of stress. And sadly, and thank you for sharing about your father. It's sad that is so commonplace. As I have been on this mission the last year, and I'm talking to carriers all the time, and I'm speaking at events, and I'll ask an audience, show of hands, who are carriers in the room, how many has lost a driver this year while they work for you? And every single hand stays up.
Right.
What other industry, if you just think about that, is this happening on the job, slumped over a steering wheel? Like, that's not okay.
Yeah.
You have to be better than that.
I was at the Big Iron Classic 3 weeks ago in Casson, Minnesota, and there was Al Koenig, late Al Koenig, owned a company called Midwest Specialized, and there was probably 450 trucks, owner-operator trucks there. But there was this display, and there was these kind of sandwich board displays, and there must have been 100 of these sandwich displays, and there were pictures of truckers on them, and it had the date, birth date, and another date, and I thought, what? And I hadn't seen this before, and it had a whole story underneath them. And it was kind of eerie. And I'm walking through them thinking, oh, these are tributes to people that have done something exceptional in the trucking industry. And the closer I got and the more I looked, I realized these were all people that had passed away. And so this was at a truck show in the Midwest. And these were all people that had worked in the trucking industry. They weren't necessarily famous people. These were just people that were being remembered in the trucking industry. And I've never seen this before anywhere in the industry, where there were so many people that were from the industry, and so many young people, like people in their 50s, that kind of fit into the demographic that we're talking here with Project 61, that had led lives that, because not everybody loses their life because of an accident.
Right.
I think that's the misnomer
Most
here.
don't.
Is a lot of people think, most don't. It's like it's more when you're not driving that people lose their lives.
On that note, when I talk to a non-trucking industry person,
right,
at first they say, oh, when I talk about Project 61 and the mission and the average life expectancy, they'll say, oh, is it because of crashes? And I said, no, almost never because of crashes.
Right.
I mean, it's It's for all the
So,
other, health reasons that we've been talking about.
yeah, I've got almost 500,000 followers on social media across a couple of platforms, and one of the reasons I do it, I kind of jokingly say I'm in charge of pumping up everyone's tires. So I'm the chief tire pumper upper. What I'm really trying to do is put a positive light on the industry, but pump people's tires up to make them feel better about what they do.
Hmm.
Because having been in a truck for weeks and weeks on end, it's a really lonely existence. And just to get a little bit of recognition can make the world a difference to someone who's in the pit of despair. Because what a lot of people don't see it, but when you're driving a truck, for a lot of people, the truck is an extension of their own self-image. Because when you drive a truck, if you're driving a truck and you're on your own, what else have you got going on in life, right? You're on your own. You're away from
Yeah.
family. Um,
Isolated.
right? You haven't got a college degree necessarily. Like you're heading away. Heading away in the opposite direction from where you want to be. Maybe economically, maybe from family, maybe career-wise. And you've got a lot of time looking at that windscreen, thinking about it. It's
Right.
really hard to put this into words, but if you've done this for millions of miles, this grinds you into the ground. A lot of truckers listening to this will know exactly what I'm talking about. So just to get a little bit of recognition is really important for drivers, but absent that recognition, this is a very soul-destroying industry for a lot of drivers, and
Yeah.
it burns them out. And you'll see them job hop. Because on Instagram, I've been doing this for about a decade now, and I will see drivers job hop between companies. Because the idea is that if I change companies, I will feel better about myself. But they forget they've got to take themselves with them to
Right.
the new shiny truck. And it doesn't change because it's the same view out the windscreen.
What I try to encourage drivers, and really this is everybody, is to really identify your why.
Mm,
And what I mean is this job is and should be, while it's important, it should be a means to an end. At the
hmm.
end of the day, you have a life. We only got one.
Right.
And you have people around you who love you, who you love, who you want to be with, you want to spend time with. Mostly that is usually, I think, somebody's why, right? Whether
Right.
it's a
Right.
spouse, whether it's their
Right.
children or even grandchildren.
Mm,
But it's identify that and hold on to that.
mm,
Obviously, you can get some momentum going, baby steps, and start to really feel good. But sometimes it gets tough, and you have to be reminded of
right.
that why, and it helps you get through the challenging time.
Particularly if you've got a good employer that's sort of putting that safety net around you. I remember talking to Ray Haight from Canada. I can't remember his trucking company's name, but they put a very good net around drivers to help understand the why. And
Yeah,
they involved the family in the
yeah,
why, like the financial reasons. Why are we doing this? Because that, if you can connect the home to the why, it made it a lot of the heartache from being on the road and being away from home a lot more easier to cope with. Jeremy, we're up on time. I know you've got to get down to your next session. How can people contact with you, particularly carriers that want to get you involved in their company?
well, and thank you for asking, and thank you for having me. So definitely I would encourage viewers, listeners to visit project-61.org. Again, it's a nonprofit, it's a 501c3, and we actually have a free mobile app that you can download in the App Store, Google, Apple. It's free, and it's purely for the industry. It's free for everybody, but it's designed for drivers to meet them where they are, give them exercise, sort of regimen, like little every day, a little bit of, and it's just a lot of fun and engagement. And we have a 61-day step challenge that starts October through November, and that's something that everyone can participate in. That'll be a lot of fun.
Fantastic. All right, that's great. Well, thanks for being on the show. A couple of shout outs. Don't forget, tune into Radio Nemo on the Road Gang Radio every day, 7 a.m. Central. You can catch them on iHeartRadio, Facebook Live, and YouTube. I'll be on with Dan Deegan tomorrow on Logistics Live, 10 a.m. Chris Kaplis is talking to Ari Ash, one of the best industry journalists on the Journal of Commerce. He's talking about the proposed transcontinental railroad merger. That'll be out this Thursday. Next week's show, we've got Gary Cornelius from TCW talking about the drayage market. With that, another show is in the books. Make sure you subscribe to our channel, set up alerts. Thanks for watching. Be safe, be nice to everyone. We'll see you again next week at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific.